You want to do it?
What am I doing? Oh yeah, you can grab me.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Generational Change. Jen.
Hi, all.
So, yet another week has gone by and more absurdity abounds, and we don't even know where to begin. The United Corporations of America, as my friend Jordan Cheriton likes to say, we certainly are living in one right now. What shall we start with? Well, what would you like to start with?
I'm focusing right now. I'm focusing so that you could do this. So you got to just keep everybody entertained for a minute.
Well, that's not it.
And I'm also making sure there's no food in my teeth.
Well, you don't want me to put a mask on yet, so we're definitely not.
No, but I mean, just, keep people intrigued.
I'd say right now,
with
my infinite
charisma,
with my infinite wisdom, I would say that, there is definitely no shortage of stories going around right now, but it's very easy to get lost in the fact that we do not have survival checks and we still don't have healthcare. And that to me is the most important thing, is that we do not have. You tell me
when you want to go here.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. So
we'll go there in a minute.
All right.
But we appreciate everybody jumping on board as always. Nina, hello. Francine, hello. Arif, hello. John, hello. Well, we're off to a good start already. We got a bunch of people in here. So remember to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video. We have a very special guest coming on tonight.
And it's not Lulu.
Oh, it's not. Well, Lou is the anointed guest.
Lou is sort of like the ancillary character. She's sort of like Newman.
Hello, Lulu.
Okay, so guys, tonight we're talking to Thom Hartmann. We're going to be speaking with him about his book, which is The Hidden History of American Oligarchy. I have read it. It's good. I think it's an easy read. It's small. I mean, it's short. And I think it really does a good job of laying out the history of oligarchy and the different periods and the cycle that we're in right now, which is, I never really thought about it this way. So I think it helps sort of break down how we've seen this over, he goes back to basically the American Revolution was our original uprising against the original oligarchy.
Yes.
Right. The Boston Tea Party was
taxation without representation.
Right. But then
once
we have been a sovereign nation, this book is really more focused on the three different periods of oligarchy that we have seen since we've become a nation. The first one was slavery. And that, unfortunately, that Southern oligarchic uprising had to be put down by war. Then you had the Industrial Revolution and the big money from, like your Rockefellers, your Vanderbilts, that whole era, Carnegie. And then that eventually had to be taken down by FDR's New Deal. So we've always seen these periods. And interestingly, they seem to be about 4 generations apart. And it's like the amount of time for when the people who were around don't remember. So now we're in our third one, which basically started around Reagan. That was, that's the rise that we're seeing now with the complete takeover of corporations, the annihilation of the working class, just all of that. So we're now at that crossroads where an oligarchy could turn into a tyranny, which, the book talks about that as under Trump.
I think we're pretty close right now.
Well, that's sort of the point. And I think that's why he wrote this, is that this really shows how this is going to go, and it can fall into tyranny. And that's what we were seeing. And hopefully now this can get taken under control through policy. I'm not as hopeful as I'd like to be about that right now, especially given some of the stuff that's been going on with the Biden administration.
When you see all of the distractions that they're throwing in our direction to not allow us to focus. I will respond real quick to the chat. Declan, Max Blumenthal is somebody who Jen happens to be friendly with. I'm sure that we will get him on at some point. John, you are absolutely wrong about Max. He is about as anti-war as it gets. And yes, Nina, Reaganomics, and that is the 40-year history that we've been living through. And now, we're trying to change that as best we can. And obviously both sides are guilty of playing right along with it. So we will do what we can in order to ensure that that does not happen. But a lot of that revolves around building relationships. And right now, it seems to me, best observation I can give is that building relationships seems to be something that's very difficult for a lot of people. And there's always some type of, distraction, whatever that may be. It's like the news story of the day that's going on. It's like, what can we do during the course of the news cycle to make sure that we are focusing on something that has very little to do with our daily lives? I would definitely start with our news and amuse segment now. Okay. Because I think it's very important to...
I think you should just let me do it.
Yes. We'll let the lady.
No, I'm just saying, just let me.
A little bit more of a personal touch.
Just no, because I have it set up. So
yes, no, that's fine.
Let it,
I'm letting you do your thing.
I'm just saying.
Just make sure you get the right one. Now you got to guess.
No, I don't.
Which one is it?
Why don't they have names?
Told
John, why don't they have names? All right, so it's
no. It's a B. It's with the B at the front.
So
with the B at the front, that's an indication. Where's the B? There's the B.
All right. Okay.
Bingo.
Okay. There we are.
So we are starting with our news and amuse topics. And the ones that I picked specifically for this evening are the ones that are distracting us from talking about the issues that really matter, which of course are, we don't have survival checks. We do not have health care. We have a serious immigration problem still that is ramping up. We have a serious COVID problem in this state that is getting so out of control that we may be in a federal shutdown from traveling out of the state. Isn't that lovely? Yeah, well, I guess we kind of deserve it.
All right, are you going to explain to me some of these graphics? I know, I don't know who this guy is. Who's that guy?
So we will start with Mr. Dave Ramsey on the left.
Okay, who is that?
And Mr. Ramsey, unfortunately, is somebody who... I guess the best way to describe him is he is a neoconservative who was born into privilege in the South. Parents were both real estate developers. Today, he is worth $500 million, give or take. We don't want to be totally wrong. He's worth $475 million.
And he is, what is he doing? He
went on Fox News today and said that us getting survival checks, not necessary. That's very convenient. I mean, at some point you got to say, as we discussed,
people don't need survival checks.
No, what we need to do is tax the rich.
Yeah.
It is a public service announcement, as we put out on social media today. It is a tax the rich infomercial.
And honestly, today with our hidden history of American oligarchy discussion later, we can talk about some of the ways in which we're working to dismantle the oligarchy, which is, controlled by people such as Mr. Ramsey here.
And that, of course, is the essence of why we live in such a messed up system, because people at his level don't want anyone to think that what he has done has hurt them in any way. But when you amass such wealth, very often the only way you get to that level is if you are actually stepping on the people underneath you. And so here's a guy who apparently not only filed for bankruptcy in the 80s, like Donald Trump, and received incredible benefits as a result of it. Yes. But he is also somebody who went around repeatedly saying that getting a PPP loan to save your business was a bad idea. And if you want the coup de grace, he is an evangelical Christian preacher.
My favorite kind of people.
What could we possibly have missed when it comes to Ramsey?
That's so Christian and godlike of him to care about the needs of the poor and the vulnerable. That's very Christ-like.
Well, as I like to say very often, there is a huge difference between those. There's a huge difference between those who follow Christ and those who follow a church. There is a significant difference between the two things.
Because then it's just a crapshoot as to whether or not you're following a church that has any sort of honor or integrity.
Well, I always found it very interesting because, again, like I said, I wasn't raised in the church, but I went to it enough where I knew that a lot of what they were saying was juxtaposed to what Jesus was saying. And it just seemed to me like there's really a major conflict of interest here because your Lord and Savior is saying one thing and you're doing something entirely different. So religious hypocrisy really knows no end. And that to me...
And by the way, that applies to all religions fairly equally, I would say. And it just depends on which century you're in as to which one is seemingly worse.
And that's a great topic we can talk about with Thom, because I believe Thom Hartmann is a religious man, I think. Or he was like a theologian or something like that.
That sounds right. Yeah.
So, and I'm sure from his perspective, talking about religious hypocrisy, that is something that the GOP 1000%, that's their wheelhouse. I mean, that is something they are really known for and have been for quite some time.
The Democrats have their hypocrisy in other ways.
Absolutely. But when it comes to the evangelical right, that is what captured the Republican Party, especially in the Reagan years. And that is what changed this whole narrative from being economic populists, which a lot of the the Eisenhower, Nixon Republicans were. And then you get into the Reagan years where Reagan completely changed the dynamics of our economy. And you couldn't justify his economics without figuring out a way to keep people in the party. And so that's where wedge issues comes into play.
Well, and he crushed labor.
Of course. Well,
so, I mean, that right there was a huge blow. I mean, there were a lot of things, and we'll get into that because that's part of this book. So are we done with this guy? But
Mr. Ramsey, of course, is the epitome of hypocrisy. And is, like I said, a public service announcement for taxing the rich. But that is yet a distraction that leads into an even bigger distraction, which is going to get talked about for quite some time because it's another one that cuts right along the dividing lines of what's going on in the country right now. Gina Carano is a former MMA star turned pretty popular actress, I would say. I admit it, I'm guilty. I haven't watched a single episode of The Mandalorian yet. I know I'm going to catch hell for it. And I happen to be a Star Wars fan of the original trilogy. And I really love... No, I really love the Rogue One. I thought that was a very good movie. But I have not paid attention to The Mandalorian. I believe that they're in like season 3 or 4 right now or something like that.
I don't know.
So my understanding is that Gina Carano is a very popular character on the show, or at least is one of the main characters, if you will. And so it's been brought to people's attention that she has posted some very incendiary things as of late. She was supportive of the Stop the Steal and believed that the election was stolen from Trump and, is proud to support him and all that stuff. And this was, I would assume that this was something that was coming. It was just, when was the dam going to break? And then apparently she puts out a post that basically equates the persecution of Republicans from Democrats to the persecution of Jews against other Jews during the Holocaust.
That wasn't what it said, and it's interesting you should say that because I love that you do not monitor
apparently,
my Facebook because that has been my post today, and I have a lot to say about this situation. And I read her tweet that, now look, I am not talking about anything that happened prior to that, okay? I don't know about her anti-mask, her Stop the Steal, whatever. That's neither here nor there. But this is another example of people playing the anti-Semitism card where it is completely not due. And I, as a Jewish person, find that very troubling for many reasons. It's sort of like this boy who cried wolf thing for me. When you call out anti-Semitism everywhere, then it kind of makes it be not important anywhere. Compared
to, let's say, the type of rhetoric that Stephen Miller was saying when he was working in the Trump administration.
Right. Or don't we have a sitting congressman who's like a complete racist?
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about what's his name? What's his name? Steve King?
No, he's gone.
Oh, he left.
Yes.
Point being, we accept it in all sorts of places. But I read her tweet, and it had nothing to do with that is being completely taken out of context. Basically, what she was insinuating is that Nazism and fascism and the rise of that cannot happen unless people turn on their own and turn in their neighbors and people bring and that is true. Okay. So there was truth in what she was saying. And she was talking about this concept of, in order for like the fascists to really take hold, it's requiring people to sort of just do, it had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. That is the point. And now that's being the card that they're playing. And I really don't like that.
Well,
so that's
and again, it
wasn't anti-Semitic.
As a private corporation, Disney does have the authority to, hire and fire as they see fit. They do have the authority to do that. But if the argument you're going to use is that Gina Carano is an anti-Semite, that's a very slippery slope when you go down that road. That's my point.
So more on that, because my thought is this.
Thom will be with us. Thom will be with us at 8:30, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. We're just getting started.
So this is my thought on that. Okay. Now, granted, I am like pretty much a First Amendment absolutist. So my thought is this. Okay. And I don't know whether or not she's an anti-Semite. I didn't get that. That was not the nature of the post.
I didn't read any other posts where she was making comments like,
so.
But you know, the one post that I did see though that I thought was like really, really telling, and it's almost and it's like, you have to wonder how many think tank troll bots are on social media to make sure that people are not paying attention to the real thing. The one post that Gina did put out there that I actually was a huge fan of is she put out a post of the image of the workers underneath the table, and the oligarchs are basically like at the Monopoly table, you know, with their cigars and their, you know, pocket watches and that type of stuff. And somebody came on there and suggested that the image of like the 7 white burly men at the table were all Jews. And I'm like, if they had if they all had yarmulkes on or something like that, yeah, that would, okay, fine. That I would believe, but that was not what that picture was.
See, this is people reading into things to suit their narrative to cancel somebody. And it makes me just so, it drives me crazy.
And if the Disney Corporation wants to do that, they have
Absolutely.
They don't even need to give a reason.
No.
You know, that's why you have contracts. If they want to terminate her contract and there are certain clauses within the contract and she violates that contract, she can be fired with no compensation, and there's nothing she can do about it. She can go to arbitration and maybe get something.
I don't even have a problem with that, to be honest with you. My issue isn't that, and I obviously know this isn't a First Amendment issue.
No.
But what bothers me is that we live in a society where Disney felt or pressured based on their financial reasons, because for them it's all money. They don't care. They have no morals.
No.
So that we live in a society that creates that to be the financially prudent thing to do, based on cancel culture. And that's really what this is. And it's really infuriating. I don't know whether she's an anti-Semite, but here's the thing. And this is the thing. If she were, I still support her right to say stuff. And I support her right to have a platform. And I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't listen to it. I wouldn't subscribe to it. I certainly wouldn't financially support her. But I cannot stand this idea. People are allowed to hate people if they want to.
For those that don't know, Skokie, Illinois is one of the biggest Jewish communities in the United States. It rivals Brooklyn, New York, and North Miami. And I can assure you that every year, I don't remember exactly when, I think it's in the spring, but neo-Nazis march in Skokie.
Well, this was a big court case. I don't know if they still do. I don't know if
my understanding is they still
really.
Do. Yeah.
Well, and it's unfortunate that there's people, but the only way to combat that, it's not even hate, but that kind of information, and that is with the opposite information, not by censorship.
Correct.
Censorship is not the answer.
To much worse results.
It is. So I say, if the people want, if she wants to say anti-Semitic stuff, she should be able to say anti-Semitic stuff. I don't have a problem with her saying it.
Yeah.
Now, I won't support her, and I'm not going to give her a platform. And eventually, people end up getting weeded out because there's more of a message that's not supportive of that. That's how we do that. We don't do it by canceling people and making them a villain. It's just.
And Melissa brings up a great point, which is, you know, if they're so concerned about the representation and their talent, all you could think, and in this moment, this is supposed to be like a learning moment. Yeah. Instead of just kicking Carano to the curb, why do you not have an intervention moment to say, you know what, we have become so divided in this country. We have to find a way to absolutely put out this flame. It's getting out of control now. And this is a very popular show. Yeah. Most people subscribe to Disney just for this. How many people that live in parts of the country who may not even be sympathetic to Trump, but would be sympathetic to this, and they are now going to be like, you know what? You just lost my business.
Well, it's the same thing as like we've talked about Tim Pool's audience. No, Lou. It's like Tim Pool's audience.
Lou, quiet, baby.
Jeez, something happened out there. But, you know, and here's the thing. I fully think Disney has a complete right to fire her for any reason. And that doesn't bother me. They're making a financial decision. I have no problem with that. I find it completely hypocritical, people that somehow applaud this, but yet they've supported so many other racist and sexist and other, you know, imperialist Disney things.
Well, if the outrage mob is what is going to ultimately get her, then, you know, it is what it is. But they will, Disney are the ones who may face the consequences, because there may be a lot of people who get turned off by this. So that's something they have to consider. And the last thing I will mention is the impeachment trial.
Okay.
There is no question that Donald Trump incited the insurrection. We paid close attention to everything that he was saying for months on end. He absolutely kept on insisting that this election was stolen and this and that. And there are people who are desperate beyond words in this country. And at the end of the day, if they feel that this is the only guy who's caring about them, then what do you expect? We're in a very tricky spot here, but there is no question that he should be convicted and not able to run for the presidency again. I don't think he's going to be running for the presidency again. That's my opinion, but who knows? With Trump, you never know. And at the end of the day, what I did want to point out is the fact that Rick Scott, who is our senator, the fact that he comes out and says, I'm not even entertaining this. I'm not watching video. I'm not taking notes. I'm not doing anything. Rick Scott is going to run for president in a few years.
And if you people thought that Donald Trump was like an authoritarian fascist kind of person,
wait till you meet Rick Scott.
And then he's also really smart and bilingual.
The one thing I always say about Rick Scott, he is one of the most evil representatives this country has ever had, and he's one of the best politicians I've ever seen.
And he's extremely bright. So imagine somebody like Trump, but smart and bilingual. Like, I think that's just sort of like that's a problem.
When people talked about repeatedly over the past several months that if Biden does not deliver in a big way for the American people, that a worse Trump is coming. The worst Trump, if my money's on it, it's Rick Scott, because he's that good.
I'm going to have nightmares about this tonight.
He'll lock up Florida. He will have no problem with his rhetoric locking up a state like South Carolina. I'm telling you, he's the one, and he is so unbelievably dangerous, and horrible. He is absolutely going to do it. So just be ready. And
I think you're right. I think he definitely has his eye on
and
that.
The last
he's
thing,
an extremely scary person.
And the last thing I'll mention before we bring Thom into the studio, we have an immensely horrific problem with unemployment in the state of Florida. Not only is our system horrifically managed, but above everything else, our unemployment benefits are as low as they get in the United States, $275 a week. Why are they so low? Because in 2011, one of the first initiatives during Rick Scott's administration was to cut unemployment benefits in half. It used to be $550 a week. Now it's $275. So when you wonder why you can't get by in the Sunshine State, well, Rick Scott has a lot to do with that. On top of the fact that he's a climate denier, on top of the fact that
he made it so that they were not allowed to use the term climate crisis or climate change rather in Tallahassee. It was banned.
Yes.
They were not allowed to use the term climate change in anything in the legislature.
So like I said, there is no question watching the impeachment trial, hats off to, Jamie Raskin, obviously what he had to say.
Joaquin Phoenix also really, really, I thought they all did a really good job.
He absolutely should be convicted. This is kind of like an open and shut case.
But he won't be.
But he won't be, because that's the country we live in, because you're not going to get 17 Republican senators to come out against him. The only thing that I can hope for is that we can move on from this as fast as possible, because people are really friggin' desperate right now. Yeah, and God knows how much worse it's going to get. But we are pleased to welcome into the studio a person
I feel like we should do like an intro.
This is a big deal.
Well, it is a big deal. But this is also somebody that everybody knows too. This isn't like an unknown person.
Well, I'm going to share a wonderful little short story with Thom when he comes in, because he's one of the reasons why I really went in with this. Like I was always interested in politics. I majored in political science at Rutgers, and I always found it to be fascinating. But Thom was the first person who I really listened to when nobody was talking about Bernie. I only knew about Bernie because he used to go on Bill Maher's show. But I knew he was a man of integrity, and I knew he cared. And when Thom started talking about him on his show, The Big Picture, I thought, you know what? Anyone who thinks that this isn't possible just isn't paying attention. And then eventually, and I'll follow up that story when I bring Thom in. But for those of you who may be new to the show, maybe into progressive politics, remember, hit the like button, subscribe, share this right now, because we're about to go live.
We're going to be bringing on Thom Hartmann, and and this is from the back of the new book, 4-time winner of the Project Censored Award. And I love Project Censored for people who don't know that. That is an awesome thing. And a New York Times bestselling author of 32 books. That's amazing.
32?
32. And America's #1 progressive talk radio show host. And that's very important because there's not enough of us.
That's for sure. Welcome, Thom.
Hi.
Hey, great to see you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I want you to know, I read this. I did. I read it. You sent it to me. I read it. And I even took copious notes. I have notes in the margins. Like I kind of went back to law school, highlighter and everything. So, but if you would just talk a little bit about what was the impetus. I mean, obviously this is I've seen you have like a series of similar type books, but the impetus of this and how this came about, this particular one.
Sure. Well, the series is about drilling down in particular parts of our history that should inform modern day debates and dialogues. But because we lack the historical context, our politics get really, really badly confused. Like, the Second Amendment, the first book was about the Second Amendment. It was, like the Second Amendment was written the way it was to preserve the slave patrols in Virginia and South Carolina. Nobody knows that, And so you had to start at the beginning. So that's why I'm doing the series. But this particular one, the last one was on monopoly. Monopoly is when economic power is concentrated in a small number of hands and they use it to block competition out of the marketplace. Oligarchy is the same thing, only in the political sphere. It's when a small number of very powerful people, typically because they're very wealthy, seize control of the political system of a nation or of a state or even a region. And essentially declare themselves oligarchs.
I mean, I think that for anybody who's been paying attention, it's clear that we're there. I mean, we're there. We've been there for a while. We've been floating around in it. And it was really great the way you broke down, because I knew this was happening and I knew it went back to the Reaganish time. I knew that that was where things went awry. But the way you break it down and how it's so cyclical is really, I think, extremely important, because I think that's how we kind of can learn like how this is going to play out and what we can do. So if you would, like, you'll do a better job talking about you say 3, there's been like 3, this is like, we're in our 3rd cycle as a nation. And if you could just talk about how that is and how the generations, how far apart it is and how this generally works.
Sure. Well, first of all, we fought a revolutionary war against an oligarchy. They call themselves a monarchy. That's an oligarchy with a DNA thread through it, but it's oligarchy. And then in the 1830s, because of the invention of the cotton gin, which made any plantation that could afford a cotton gin literally 50 times more efficient at carding and cleaning cotton than any of the small ones. So they were able to wipe out their competition and turn the South into a police state oligarchy in about 30 years, between 1825 roughly and 1860 1860, which led to the Civil War. And then they declared war on us in part because that democracy up north was causing rabble down south. Particularly people who had come over as indentured Irishmen and Scots to start to rebel, in addition to the slave rebellions that were undergoing. And so, I thought they had to take us out. We beat those oligarchs. Then the oligarchs rose again through the Industrial Revolution, another technological shift that brought it about. And Franklin Roosevelt took them on. He said, they hate me and I welcome their hatred. And now we're in this 3rd phase, which really began in its starkest form with the election of Ronald Reagan. It started arguably a decade before that, and it was warned about 3 decades before that. And I don't know how much detail you want me to get into about how we got to there, but we can come back to that. You mentioned the generational. Just
generally, like how it's this far apart and how we're seeing it as a cycle. Sure. And then I have a follow-up to that. So talk about the rate starting.
Go there then. Strauss and Howe wrote a book called The Fourth Turning, in which they laid this out in considerable detail. And I, to some extent in the book, point to that. And what they pointed out is that there are typically 4 generations that repeat themselves constantly forever. Just to pick one particular random place, let's start with a generation that experiences a Great Depression and a war. That generation, as a consequence of their experience growing up through that, will produce offspring, the next generation, this generation with the parents, their children growing up through that, they become the generation that are the quiet, hard workers, the archetype of the 1950s, the greatest generation. They put their nose down, they don't complain, they get the job done, they loyally join, the draft when the World War II is declared, etc. That generation, because of their, persistence like that, their children are growing up in a world that's functional and orderly and structured, and hey, that's boring and no fun. And so their children tend to be the ones that are saying, my parents worked their asses off, and what did they get for it? A house in the suburbs, really? I want, spiritual fulfillment. And so this third generation will literally break with ways of the past, socially very revolutionary generation, and they tend to go off in spiritual and political searches. And that's the 60s and 70s. And then that generation produces a generation of children who, again, are looking at their parents and saying, mom and dad sat and meditated 3 hours a day, and it didn't do a damn thing for them. I want to get rich, and I'm concerned about security and safety. So, and then that fourth generation will go so excessive, trying to get rich, trying to create a really roaring economy. They'll go so excessive that they crash the economy into a depression, which inevitably will lead to a war. And boom, we're back to the fourth, the fourth turning, as I'll call it. And each generation is 20 years, and so that's an 80-year cycle. And it's real interesting that 80 years ago was the end of World War II and kind of the end of the Great Depression era. 80 years before that was the Civil War, or the end of the Civil War. 80 years before that was the Revolutionary War. And in Strauss and Howe's books, they take it back to the 1500s every 80 years. And you can see each one of these four generations. If that was your question, I talk about that in the book.
Yeah, no, and it's great. And I love that because it is so cyclical and we see it. The only difference is we have greater technology as we move along. Yeah. So we have that we've perfected the ways of hurting each other much better and than we had. But what's interesting is it seems like the first time and the second time it was brought to an end by the Civil War, and the second time it was brought to the end by legislation by the New Deal, and
well,
so
and also by the Great Depression. That woke people the hell up, which made it possible.
But it wasn't a war that ended it. It was, and so the question is, can we do that again as opposed to having another civil war?
Yeah, in other words, if Hitler hadn't come along, we might not have had World War II, and we might not have had a war. In which case, it would have been a really good outcome. And
was right. That wasn't because of our oligarchy in particular. There were other factors.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And Strauss and Howe actually kind of have a debate about this. And there's a whole debate that's grown up around this whole concept of these 80-year cycles. And then also there are 50-year business cycles that fit within those, or not within them, but kind of happen at the same time. And we're about 50 years out from, the Powell memo in 1971. And so it may be time for another turn in that too, although I don't get into that in this book. But there's a big debate about whether depressions inevitably lead to wars. And, there's a 3 out of 4 times, certainly they do. The French and Indian Wars, the War of the Roses. I mean, those are in those cycles that Strauss and Howe point to. But I'm not a real scholar of the cycles of history in that regard. So I can't offer a definitive answer.
We're speaking with Thom Hartmann of the Thom Hartmann Show, his new book, The Hidden History of American Oligarchy. Thom, we don't really have what I would think is an anti-war movement, especially in Congress right now, but I do think there is a growing progressive movement, whether it's Cori Bush, AOC, Jamal Bowman, Ro Khanna, Marie Newman. There's obviously several, I'm sure, potential new individuals who may hopefully throw their hat in the ring for 2022 and beyond. How important is it to really develop that grassroots movement that right now seems to be, obviously a lot of people are still, licking their wounds from what happened to Bernie. And obviously right now, the the trail that's been left by Trump, and Lord knows how long that's going to take to clean up. But I think right now the desperation is really it's at a boiling point, especially when it comes to the survival checks and not having universal health care. So I'd like to know from your perspective, seeing what you've seen over the years, how important it is right now to really develop that grassroots movement that may be there, but it seems more like a rudderless ship right now.
If we are not successful in producing genuine progressive change, and let's be very clear, every public opinion survey for the last 20 years shows that everything that Bernie ran on is wanted by a majority of Americans, more than 50% of Americans, and these days more than 80%, from free college to a national healthcare system to a government guarantee of a job if the private sector is in collapse, to a higher minimum wage, to enhance union rights. These are not radical positions. This is where America is at. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is because it's obvious we are in an oligarchy. It's been about 20 years, according to Gillens and Page's research, since what the average person wants gets translated into legislation. Back before Reagan, what people wanted, we turned into law. We created, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, long-term unemployment, housing assistance, Pell Grants for college. I mean, I could give you a list of 100 things long that people wanted and legislators turned into law between 1950 and, well, you can go back to the 30s even, Social Security, and 1980. But starting in 1980, really, that just came to a screeching halt. And now it's only what the billionaires want. That's why the only legislative accomplishment of the Trump administration was a $2 trillion tax cut for billionaires. So the problem with this is that when people figure out that their elected officials are ignoring them, that they're not getting what they want, and like I said, this has been going on for 20 years, that, in other words, when people figure out that they're in an oligarchy, oligarchies are extraordinarily unstable political systems. They very rarely last more than a single generation, rather longer than 20 years. And when they change in one of two directions. Either the people take out the oligarchs or take down the oligarchs, or the oligarchy, let's say, as happened with the Civil War and as happened with Franklin Roosevelt's war on what he referred to as the economic royalists. Or the oligarchs have amassed so much power that they look around and they say, holy crap, these people are trying to take us down. We're going to pass some laws, and we're going to, and basically the country turns into a police state. And this is what you saw happen to the new democracy of Russia. This is what you see happening right now in Hungary, which used to be a fully integrated European Union country. We're seeing it in Brazil right now with Bolsonaro. We're seeing it in the Philippines with Duterte. Pick your example. It's happening in Poland with Duda right now, in Turkey with what's his name? Anyway, you get my point. Yeah. And so Trump was taking us on this path right smack dab into police state. I mean, that was absolutely the direction he was going. And there's no doubt in my mind that you and I would probably be in jail right now, or maybe a year or two from now, if he had been able to hold power. Because when you look at the track of these oligarchs, as they're going through the process of seizing control of a democracy and turning it into an oligarchy, they begin trashing the press. And when they finally flip it into a police state, the first people they imprison are the press. And murder, by the way, as you can see, all happening all over the world right now. It's not a safe time to be a journalist in Turkey, for example. And that's the direction they were going. So we're at this really critical point. Now, the one thing that will cause a large number of Americans to say we want to go with democracy instead of a police state is if the Biden administration and the Democratic Party can deliver on genuine progressive reforms. If they fail to do that, like Clinton failed to do it and Obama failed to do it, you're going to have a whole bunch of voters who are going to sit around. I knew a half a dozen people when I lived in Washington, D.C. They were all military or ex-military, who were fanatic about Bernie during the primary and all voted for Trump. That's what you're going to see. People are going to say, to hell with them. They're all politicians. Whoever has the best line about how they're going to blow up the system, I'm going to vote for it because the system is screwed. And that'll just bring us President Josh Hawley or President Rick Scott or in 2024, and then somebody smarter than Donald Trump will pull the switch, and that'll be the end of America. So it's, in short answer to your, I'm sorry I gave you a long answer, but in answer to your question, it's vital that progressives rise up, create and fill a movement, take over the Democratic Party at the local level, show up at your local Democratic Party, become a progressive, become a precinct committee person. These are the people who pick the primary candidates and write the party platform. And let's take over the Democratic Party broadly. I mean, we've been doing this now slowly for 20 years, and we're starting to get some success. And then the last point I'll make is the one thing that will prevent that kind of progress by the Biden administration and guarantee a Republican president in 2024 is the filibuster. If the Republicans can still exercise a veto on Joe Biden doing any of the progressive things that he and Kamala Harris are actually talking about doing. And I got to say, a year ago, I never in my wildest dreams would have thought I would be talking about Joe Biden this way. But in any case, if the people can't, if the Republicans stop him from doing those things, then, you know, we're toast. We're toast. And so the most important thing that people can do who are listening or watching right now is call their senators at 202-224-3121, which is the main switchboard in Washington, D.C. for Congress, and just ask for your senator and just say, blow up the filibuster, especially if your senator is Joe Manchin in West Virginia or Kristen Sinema in Arizona, because they're the two who have said, we're the two Democrats who are going to hang on to the filibuster, you know, to help out Mitch McConnell. Well, obviously to help out big coal and big real estate and banking, you know, but anyway, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about media. We're getting feedback. I'm getting feedback.
That's just you. I don't know if that may have been on your end, Thom. Okay, try again.
Okay.
What's that? What I missed?
No. Okay. So we're talking about this. I mean, there's rabid censorship going on right now. And like you were just saying, like under a fascist, tyrannical regime, obviously people that are speaking truth to power are going to be targeted. But a bigger concern regarding the media that you do go into in this book is how it has been completely purchased by the oligarchy. And that's one of the key steps in creating their oligarchy, is having control of the narrative. And so when someone like Donald Trump says, oh, that's fake news, yeah, kind of, in regards to some of the stuff he's talking about, because it's very cherry picked and it's very propagandized and it's corporate talking points. And so we're in this problem where the good journalists are obviously being persecuted and the other ones are spewing corporate talking points. So, you know, how do you reconcile it?
Well, and the last point that I would add to your list of the crimes of the media or the failures of the media is that the decisions that are made about what is going to be presented to us as news and what isn't are not based on what's important. They're based on, however you define the word important, they're based on what's going to get the most views, what's going to hold people's attention. If they thought they could get away with showing us cat videos all night, they'd do it, you know, because it's all about getting the money from the advertisers. But the reality is that, you know, from the 1920s until 1996, we had laws in place to prevent the consolidation of media, precisely because we understood what a threat that would be. And you know, particularly after the yellow journalism era of the late 1800s, those laws actually got radically strengthened in the 1920s and 1930s as they applied to broadcasting. So that if you owned a newspaper in one particular place, you couldn't also own a radio station or a television station. If you owned a radio station, you had to live in the state. If you had a television station, you had to live in the state. There was cross ownership bans and aggregate ownership bans, and they were absolutely in place. And that all got blown up in 1996 when Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 96. And you saw this little company, Clear Channel, that had, you know, a few dozen radio stations down south, suddenly buy basically every consequential radio station. I mean, they ended up with almost 1,000 radio stations within a year or two. And what did they do with those stations? Well, it was a very conservative company. They put right-wing talk shows on, you know, probably 20% of them. That's just a guess, but, you know, a good chunk of them. And then, you know, the Cumulus, same deal. I mean, this is a crisis. Media ownership in the United States. We need to relocalize media ownership, and we need to be breaking up the big media combines. And let me just add a punctuation mark to this, which I don't think is in the book. I think it was in the first draft. I had to cut like 20,000 words out of the book. But because I write long and I'm talking long, I'm sorry. But when Howard Dean, who was, Bernie Sanders progressive, just slightly less than Bernie, but they were friends and colleagues from Vermont, and we lived right down the street from them, and from Howard. And when he was running for president, and he was at the top of his game. I mean, he was on the cover of Time magazine. He was in the Democratic primary. He was at the cover of Time magazine. He was at the top of the opinion polls. And Chris Matthews had him on his show on MSNBC. And he said to Howard Dean, he said, they started talking about something with the economy, and Dean said something about monopolies, and that monopolies were helping screw up the economy or preventing it from growing. And Chris Matthews said, well, what about media monopolies? And Howard Dean said, well, you should break them up. And there was this long pause, and Chris says, but, we're on MSNBC, we're owned by General Electric. It's not a media company, it's a giant combine. Should we be forced to spin off NBC and MSNBC? And Howard Dean said, absolutely, it should be broken up. And I turned to my wife, to Louise, who was sitting next to me, and I said, he's toast. He's completely screwed. And 5 days later was the Dean scream, as I recall. It might have been a week later. It was in that neighborhood where they took a perfectly normal thing and just jacked the audio insanely and made it seem like he was nuts and destroyed him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now he works for a pharmaceutical corporation. I would like to, and we're speaking with Thom Hartmann of the Thom Hartmann Show.
I'm going to put the book up. That's
The Hidden History of American Oligarchy. Should definitely check it out. I would definitely say that the moment, you usually, you don't know when the moment's going to happen, but I do think that the moment where everything changed in the United States, no question, was when Reagan fired the air traffic controllers who were striking.
Right, in August of 81, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was, listen, he was especially during his first term. We can spend an entire day talking about what a disastrous second term Reagan had. But his first term, he was immensely popular, and he was basically able to do whatever he wanted. And the day he fired those air traffic controllers and not a single union decided to walk out on the job was basically the day that labor was dead. And it was just a question of how long it was going to take. But I do think that there is an opportunity right now for that moment to go in the other direction. And that, of course, is if the Bessemer, Alabama labor workers at the Amazon facility are able to form a union. Right. I do think that that will be the moment that changes everything for the labor movement in the United States. What are your thoughts on that? Bernie has obviously come out for it. A number of others as well have too. I believe Ro Khanna has. I do think the importance of those workers forming a union against the most powerful man on earth right now, I think could potentially be a major game changer for the labor movement in this country. What do you think about that?
I think your analysis is brilliant. I think you're spot on.
Don't fill his head with that. Do not do that. Oh,
I've been talking up the action down in Alabama, but these are monster slayers, Goliath slayers. They're taking down the richest man in the world, the biggest corporation, one of the biggest corporations in America. And if they succeed, it hadn't occurred to me how huge the consequences would be, but I think that your analysis is absolutely right. Reagan, when he came into office, he had basically two jobs to do. The first was to dial back on the wealth of the middle class, because everybody on the conservative side believed that Russell Kirk's 1951 prediction that if the middle class got too wealthy, you would see society be torn apart by the forces that would be unleashed. Everybody on the conservative side believed that to be true. And so Reagan had to reduce the wealth of the middle class, which he did. And number two, he wanted to defund the Democratic Party. The Republicans hadn't held the U.S. House of Representatives except for 2 years, 48, 49, since 1932. And they still didn't until 1996. They had it one more time. But the other thing was to rip the financial guts out of the Democratic Party. And in 1976 and 78, in the Buckley and Bellotti decisions, when the Supreme Court said that giving money to a politician, owning a politician in exchange for that money giving you legislation, that was no longer to be considered bribery or political corruption. And instead, that was called free speech, that money wasn't actually money. Those two Supreme Court decisions just opened a floodgate of cash into the GOP, which Reagan coasted on right into the White House. But the Democrats at that time, they said, we don't need to take that money because we got all this money coming from the unions, because the unions were literally awash in cash. 1/3 of America had a union job. And so average people through their union dues were funding the Democratic Party, and they were just fine with it because the Democratic Party was giving them back what they wanted with, Social Security and Medicare.
And how many people are in a union today? Less than
6%. 6% of the American private workforce. Yeah, I mean, and in fact, Reagan so effectively gutted the funding for the Democratic Party by cutting in half the union movement in just 12 years, in just his and Bush's administration, that Bill Clinton and Al Fromm had
in 86, I think it was, right around there. That's where they first. Yeah, and they decided, hey, listen, the unions don't have the money anymore. We'll get in bed with the big banks, and that was it. And that was all.
That's right. They created this thing called the DLC to funnel money into the Democratic Party because the unions couldn't do it anymore. And they thought, we'll take good money, right? We'll take money from the banks and the insurance companies because that's white collar stuff. Nobody's getting killed by that like they do in oil and steel. We'll leave that to the Republicans. Yeah, how'd that work out?
No, it's I always say especially when people ask, what are my thoughts about third parties? I say I'd be happy with 2, because right now we don't have a Labor Party. And that is a huge problem. So if you can't have 2 corporate parties that are only really separated by a few social issues and yet are still taking money from the same people, I mean, it's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Did you hear what Biden said yesterday, though, about unions?
No.
He said he was doing a little riff about his Build Back Better thing. And he said, and this time we're going to be damn sure, I'm paraphrasing here, but we're going to be damn sure, he was quite emphatic, we're going to be damn sure that it's union labor that rebuilds this country, not just labor.
Well, I'd like to see that.
I haven't heard a president talk like that since Lyndon Johnson.
You know what's going to allow us to do that? Those $2 trillion in tax cuts that Trump got? Turn those $2 trillion around and give us an infrastructure bill based on clean energy jobs.
I agree. And roll back George W. Bush's $2.5 trillion of the tax cuts, and roll back Reagan's tax cuts, and take us back to the 74% top tax bracket that you only hit after you make $3, $4, $5 million a year. Take us back to that tax bracket that we had, for the first couple of years, for the first year of the Reagan administration, through Carter's administration, through Ford's administration, through Nixon's administration. LBJ dropped it to 74% from 91%, which, Jack Kennedy blew up the economy, grew the economy with. Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican, loved that 90% top tax bracket. Harry Truman. I mean, it's so ahistoric to say high taxes destroy the economy when the 3 consecutive decades, the only 3 consecutive decades in the history of America where we had, annual GDP growth that was greater than 3% per year were the 50s, 60s, and 70s. To say, and the top tax rate was 90%. And then just in the last 2 years of that period, it was dropped down to 74%. But LBJ bragged about the fact that taxes on rich people went up when he dropped that tax, because most of what he was doing was closing loopholes. And so the tax collections on rich people went up. And the supply siders will say, well, that's because he lowered the taxes. No, it's because he closed the loopholes. Anyhow, I'm sorry, I'm ranting again here, Edge.
No, but it's a great ranter. We're speaking with Thom Hartmann of the Thom Hartmann Show. His book is the hidden history of the American oligarchy. It's not so hidden anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. No, but it was a really good way to look at it, how it happens historically, and not just look at it, oh, right now we're in an oligarchy, just as if people understand what that really means. I think it's important to look at the history, which we don't usually.
Yeah, do. And if Trump wasn't, and again, I always say, we've always said that when it comes to Trump's, I mean, obviously at the end of his term, his rhetoric got very dangerous. But for the most part, his rhetoric over the course of his presidency was completely incinerated. It's all about divide and conquer strategy. I always said that his position on the environment was unforgivable. That was the worst part of his presidency, the absolute destruction. And the fact that he was so callous about the virus, he just didn't care. It's not a question of whether he believed it was real or not. It's like he just couldn't be bothered. He's like, I totally want to be golfing the entire time. That's all I really care about. And it's true. And I can only imagine what it would be like, being in DC, for the people who really cared and are trying to get stuff done. And here you have a commander in chief who, basically just wants to be campaigning. He just wants to literally be a dictator. He wants people to kiss the ring and admire him and whatnot. And, I can imagine that the destruction that he did do over the course of that time was pretty significant. We were just talking about this before you came on the air. we're both convinced, obviously, that, the GOP is not going to convict him. But do you think there is any kind of a scenario where some type of a backroom deal may be made where he simply does not run again? What do you think ultimately will be the outcome of this circus that is the Trump circus, if you will?
Well, even if he's not convicted by the Senate, and there's a caveat to that, he can still be convicted for violating the 14th Amendment. I believe it's the 14th and not the 15th.
It is, and they need less votes.
That's right. It would take, I believe it would take 51 votes, or it may have to be done at the Supreme Court. I mean, there's a debate about exactly how that gets played out. But one way, what's interesting is Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution, which outlines the power to impeach, says that there's 100 senators right now. It doesn't say that that it requires a 2/3 majority of all the elected senators. It says it requires a 2/3 majority of the senators present. That's exact language of the members present is the language from the Constitution. So if a dozen or so Republicans who are not pro-Trump like Ted Cruz and not anti-Trump like Mitt Romney, but kind of in that middle area, were simply to get the flu the day of the vote and not show up, their colleagues joined with the Democrats might well be able to convict Trump.
That's very optimistic, I think. I don't know. I think that I wouldn't hold out a lot of hope. I would.
We're full of optimism, but we also know that this is a very unique time in history. The amount of people who are suffering right now, obviously there were a lot of very volatile people who stormed the castle, if you will. But there was probably in excess of 100,000 people who showed up in DC. Maybe 1,000 of them attempted to get inside. As I like to tell the story, Jen and I actually did go to Trump's rally in Sunrise in Trump land.
We went to a Trump rally,
and I can, and I can tell you that the people that they put on TV, the Confederate flag waving, Southern pride crazies, if you will, 5 to 10% of the audience. That's how much it is. The other 95% of people who are there are everyday people like you and I. And that's the
seekers.
I think you've got a lot of people who are just really tired of, I said this many times, as much as people dislike Trump, they dislike DC politicians even more.
Well, that's where Trump was politically and strategically brilliant. I believe he was the first Republican person running for president who realized that America has become an oligarchy, that oligarchies are unstable, and if we're not careful, this oligarchy is going to disintegrate, and the Democrats are going to take it back. I'm small d Democrats, and it's ripe to be turned into a police state. Because he's following Orban's playbook, he's following Putin's playbook, he's following Hitler's playbook. This is not a secret, how to do this. Right? It's happened over and over again. One thing I did want to mention, you said, if I may, about the virus. I wrote about this over at Medium.com. April 7th. We have to remember April 7th. This was a critical turning point that is almost never discussed. At least in the white community, in urban radio and black radio, you will hear this discussed frequently. And most white people I know are completely unaware of this. In March, throughout March and the first week of April, Jared Kushner and a bunch of guys, they had this whole little committee they'd put together. They were going to do something. They were going to do something about the virus. They were working on an order a production order to increase masks and PPE. They were ordering stuff from all around the world. The post office had a plan on the books. They'd already put in the request for proposals and the initial purchase orders to send 5 masks to every family in America. They were moving. And suddenly on April 7th, the headline at the top of the New York Times and at the top of the Washington Post, and the story that led NBC, ABC, CBS, MSNBC, and CNN and Fox, was that a new study was just published finding that while black people are less than 20% of the population, they're more than 40% of the deaths. And at that moment in the Trump White House, within 1 week, they did a complete 180. Oh, it's just black people dying? and mostly and exclusively in blue states. And that, I believe, and I in my article I document all the links, and the exact same thing happened on conservative media. Rush Limbaugh made a 180 that week, as did all of the other right wingers on radio. Prior to April 7th, they were like, "Oh, there's something going on. We need to pay attention to this. Let's not get crazy about it." But this is after April 7th. This is just like the flu. I don't think most people realize how deep racial animus is in the white supremacist Republican Party, but it's there and it's huge.
Yeah.
And that is why I believe the only person who can salvage the Republican Party, because I do think that both parties are going through a transitional period right now, but I definitely believe that the person who will carry Trump's mantle, if given the opportunity, is Rick Scott. I don't think there is anybody who is more capable. I think he has all the credentials to do it. He basically runs Florida, former governor, current U.S. senator, exceptionally wealthy, an exceptional criminal, I might add. He
the largest Medicare scam in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Fifth Amendment 75 times. And yet he is... I don't know how to describe. He is,
I call him Voldemort.
But he is, Tom, you've been following politics for 5 decades, maybe more. He is a phenomenal politician. He really is.
He is.
And
no, I agree. I absolutely agree. He wouldn't be where he is if he wasn't.
I remember when he gave his victory speech back in 2018, and I just thought that's why he wins, because he just knows how to do it.
And he's got the "aw shucks" thing down too.
He can shed the tear. He can talk about his mother. He can speak in Spanish fluently, like really well.
It's a big
deal. And
deal.
It's just, again, you can see this, like you see it coming before it actually happens. Like, you know, where the Democratic establishment is trying to position their chess pieces on the board right now between, you know, obviously Kamala and Buttigieg. It's like, you just know. After a while, you kind of get hip to the game. I just hope enough people are getting hip to it to recognize that necessary change is coming, but it's got to come from the right people. And so I do want to throw a little wrinkle in, because she's obviously the person that we think is the leader of the progressive movement. How important is it to get Nina Turner into the United States Congress?
I think it's really important. Nina, I know Nina. You know, Louise and I have had meals with her and her husband. She's spectacular. She's there are not enough superlatives. She's solid. She's smart. She has legislative experience. She worked her way up in the Ohio legislature. But let's not succumb to savior complex. To this idea that one person is going to save us. All of us have to get active inside the Democratic Party and turn this thing around. And people whose politics, people who have the political skill set, who have the ability to give a public speech, who would like that kind of work. It would make me crazy. I could never be a politician, but there are some people who like that. And those people who are progressive need to be running for office. School board, town council, a county clerk, state representative, and ultimately U.S. Congress. And we need to be building this thing right across the board. And Nina's a great part of that, and she's a huge advocate for that too. She's a real grassroots up person.
Yeah, she's one of those people that I know would step out and support somebody who's challenging an incumbent when no one else does. Somebody who will say, "Yeah, I know." I that is something that I think we really need, are people that are willing to really speak up once they're in power, to help other people get into that position. And I mean, that's something that I noticed as a candidate, is how few people that are willing to actually put their neck out, even though they support you behind the scenes. And that's a problem. That's a big problem. And that's a problem I have with the Democratic Party in general, is how they treat democracy within their own sandbox, because they're not very democratic when it comes to primaries.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. And that, I think, is a big turnoff to a lot of people. And it has pushed a lot of people outside of the Democratic Party and into this whole sphere of whether it's People's Party, the Green Party. And that's where the left is going, because the Democrats have moved so far to the right. And that's,
well, it depends on what part of the country you're talking about. But, you know, I get what you're saying. And that's, but, you know, the thing that I think some people miss is that a political party is not really supposed to be a democracy. A political party is a club. And if enough of us, and this is the amazing thing, you know, if I was to tell you, hey, we could take over NBC, all we have to do is get enough people to show up, you know, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and we can literally take over management of it and program the network however we want. It would be like, whoa, how do I do that? Well, here's this multi-billion-dollar corporation called the Democratic Party that's capable of passing legislation from the federal level all the way down to you know, your zoning, your local county, and it's wide open. The doors are open. You can just walk in and take it over. And because it's a club and not a democracy, I mean, yeah, they'll vote on things and, you know, majority is supposed to rule, but really because it's a club, the people who represent the majority within the club are pretty much going to take it over, and they're pretty much going to push out the people who disagree with them. And with the rise of Clinton in the 90s, the Democratic Party started shedding the LBJ progressives and the anti-war movement as well, that I was part of, and began, you know, embracing Jamie Dimon type banking fat cats. Now the Democratic Party, and this has been going on for a decade slowly, but I'd say in the last 4 years, it's really sped up. And Bernie Sanders is probably the main reason. Although in this last cycle, you could add Elizabeth Warren to that mix, which means now, hey, it's getting more diverse. It's getting more, you know, the base is even broader. We have 2 progressive political candidates for president. That's a huge thing inside the Democratic Party. It wouldn't have happened in 92. It wouldn't have happened in 96. It wouldn't have happened in 2000. Frankly, I don't think it would have happened until maybe 2012. So if we can get enough of us inside and take over, it'll be a hell of a lot easier than trying to build an external party from the ground up. And history shows that because we don't have proportional representation in the United States, we're one of only 7 democracies in the world that doesn't have proportional representation. Therefore, whenever, as a consequence of that, whenever a third party arises, it always takes a bite out of the party that it's closest to philosophically. And, you know, that can be a very suicidal thing to do politically.
I definitely agree with what you're saying. When we're speaking with Thom Hartmann of the Thom Hartmann Show. His book is The Hidden History of the American Oligarchy. Definitely check it out. I can't agree with you more because, as you know, and you follow politics as closely as anybody, you know, Wasserman Schultz pretty much embodies the worst of the Democratic Party. But aside from, obviously, her propensity to just completely sell out to corporate special interests, 90% of her campaign finance comes from, obviously, oligarchic contributors, if you will. The people who are in control of the Broward County Democratic Party are very much the ones who protect her, if you will. They've been with her for 30 years.
It's a club. I'm telling you. It's a friggin' club.
But you're so right when you say that there are so many open spots. Yeah. There are so many opportunities to get involved. I know the tendency is to say, well, the nice shiny object over there is the People's Party or the Green Party. But the truth of the matter is the Democratic Party could be taken over. People just have to be willing to put in the work. One of the reasons the GOP gets away with what they get away with is because that party and the people in it, they put in the work. They are on the school board. They are in the state house legislature. I mean, just look at Florida alone, and you can see that they cover all their bases. And for whatever reason,
and this was not an accident, if I may. In 2008, or actually it was in 2009, when Obama won that election, as I recall. This stuff still lives over on YouTube. You can find it. This group that I'd never heard of before, and I was in, you know, in like the 4th or 5th year of my radio show. It's got Concord in its name. It's not Concord Coalition, but it's something like that, the Concord Coalition kind of thing. This group started passing out, distributing DVDs and letters and just all kinds of stuff, you know, on how to become a precinct committee person. And there's this incredible video that you can see of what they were passing out back then, and it was going to hundreds of thousands of Republican, registered voters and people who had been even minorly active in the Republican Party. And this guy is just looking at the camera and he says, "You think the most powerful political position in the United States is president of the United States. That's not true. The most powerful political position in the United States is committee chairperson." I mean, this is, and just, went through this whole explanation about how if you can get on these, inside the party, if you can get inside the Republican Party, and this was going to Tea Party activists, if you can get inside the Republican Party, we can take it over. And once we take it over, it'll be our party. And they did it. They pulled it off. Precinct committee person, excuse me.
Thom, how long did it take? I mean, think about it. It took maybe, I guess,
about a decade.
Yeah, it started to form, I guess, in the latter years of the Bush administration, around like 2006, maybe 2000, somewhere around there.
Yeah, and this big campaign was rolled out right after right after Obama won, as I recall.
Yeah, and then it really took off. I mean, think about it. Ted Cruz is as Tea Party as it gets, and he was number 2. Granted, I think Ted Cruz is really hurt himself politically, and I do think it will ultimately cost him in the long run. But to think that he got that close, knowing that their ideology is so unbelievably flawed, it had some, I mean, there were merits to the Tea Party movement initially, but then the Koch brothers got their hands in it. And that's one of the things that, I do want to
Hence the oligarchy.
And I think that's a good place for us to sort of wind down the conversation. Is it seems that a lot of these political movements, obviously the one that I would say is very strong down here in South Florida is the Sunrise movement, particularly Sunrise Miami. They have a very solid group. But unfortunately, as we've seen, Our Revolution's a good example of that, and some others in between. A lot of them ended up getting co-opted by the establishment. And I think because we're in such an oligarchic state right now, and because there's so few that control so much, it's so easy to get co-opted. How do we avoid that if we're going to build a sustainable movement when it's so tempting to give in?
We just have to reverse the flow. Instead of us sitting back and taking money or expertise or talent or time or resources from the establishment, as it were. Instead, we need to get inside the establishment and take it over from within. I mean, this is what I'm talking about here is stuff that in some countries, this kind of conversation gets you put in jail. We're talking about getting inside a political party and taking it over. And this is what the Tea Party guys and the right wingers did with the Republican Party, a decade or two ago, and it's what progressives did with the Democratic Party in the 1930s. This was what FDR did. Political parties swing back and forth constantly. They're very, very squishy things. I'm lacking a word there. Fungible came to mind, but it's the wrong word. Yeah. And so, just reverse the flow. If you've got an independent organization, instead of looking to the Democratic Party for resources, try to figure out a way how your organization can become a force inside the Democratic Party, that they can need you, that you can, push them rather than being pushed by them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that one of the things we have here in Florida that's really upsetting to progressives is that our state party is largely financed by Walmart and Big Sugar.
Right.
And this is a big problem, especially for candidates and even certain people that are in office. I don't know how they do it, but to be running on a platform of getting the corporate money out while running as a member of a political party that is at the behest of those exact corporations, it's a certain sort of cognitive disconnect that as a progressive running within the Democratic Party, we have to come to terms with.
Well, I'm sorry, finish your thought.
No, I was just going to say it's very, very difficult as a progressive because I wouldn't take corporate money, but yet I'm running within a party that takes corporate money. And so it's not that I'm personally hypocritical because I don't give them money. So, but it's seen that way. There's a very negative connotation amongst the left to be affiliated with a party that's corporate owned.
Right. Well, and some people are cynical about government too, but we all agree that we should run for government. We should. I mean, we were talking just a minute ago about how important it is to get Nina Turner into Congress.
Yes.
you know, I would say, you know, getting a majority of progressives in control of the Democratic Party in Florida is equally important. In fact, probably more important. One of the things that Concord group was telling the Tea Partiers about how to take over the Republican Party, in one of their videos, the guy was talking about, don't go in like you're some kind of radical. Don't go in like you're some kind of revolutionary. Don't go in like you're telling them that you're going to try and change the party. Just go in, you know, take your place, get a lot of your friends in, and eventually you'll hit a critical mass, and then it's just up to the vote. You just take it over. And, you know, that's thinking strategically rather than reactively. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Florida politics.
I don't think you'll want to be.
No.
One thing I could
well,
say.
You know, the Democratic Party in Oregon has got its own problems too, although there's a really strong progressive coalition here.
Yes,
yeah,
you
and
do.
listen, you know, Merkley's a great senator. Blumenthal's a very good congressman. You've definitely got some good people. There's no question about that. But unfortunately, in our state, we don't have any good people.
Yeah.
Zero. And that's unfortunate. We do have a young lady by the name of Anna Eskamani, who I do believe is going to run for governor. And I think she's very good. And she's in the state house, puts forth really good legislation. It's going to be very interesting, the Democratic primary. DeSantis is going to be a very tough nut to crack, but I do think he's vulnerable. I do. And he's also a jerk. And I think if you get the right person to run against him, especially one with no baggage and one that has the populist left, because let's face it, despite all his baggage, Gillum did have he ran right into the progressive lane, and especially in a multi-way race, that works. And he got the nomination.
Look what happened with the minimum wage down there.
Yeah.
They and again, a lot of
Florida isn't progressive.
Well, think about it. I actually
working labor.
Right. That's why you all need to take over the damn Democratic Party in Florida.
The problem is a lot of those people are independents and reds because they're working class people and they're just.
Tom, you hit the nail right on the head. Being strategic is not the easiest thing to do when people
and it takes years.
It does. And a lot of people don't have years, and that's the way they look at it. But that's why it's on us. That's why we're trying to build here in South Florida the progressive movement, because I really do believe Florida is ground zero for an economic populist uprising. This state is driven by tourism and hospitality. It is literally ground zero for this, and that is why it leans so hard into Trump. There's a lot of things we can look back on, you know, what Bernie did in both runs where he obviously made mistakes, but he never attempted to push the vote here in Florida. For whatever reason, he may have just thought it was a lost cause, especially in South Florida. But with that said, not only did they vote convincingly for Trump this time, even more so than 2016, but we did pass a $15 minimum wage.
At the same time.
Yep. And we almost passed jungle primary vote in Florida, which means that I think Florida is also ground zero to get ranked choice voting passed. So there's definitely the opportunity is here, and I'm in it for the long haul. I'd like to think my friend here is definitely in it for the long haul as well. We'll see what ultimately happens in 2022. But what's more important, like you said, you know, even if Jen were to run again, and even if she were to beat Wasserman Schultz, if you don't have the infrastructure on the ground to change the narrative, it's not going to mean much, because this is already a blue district. And while we could definitely provide a much better living situation for tons of people here that Jen could do that Debbie obviously wouldn't do, that's not going to change the overall prospect of the way politics is done in the state and the country. And that's something that we are working towards.
And let's not forget, you talk about all the people in Florida who voted for Donald Trump, and you're absolutely right. Donald Trump's principal platform, the things that he ran on, he stole from Bernie. He was lying through his teeth, but he stole them from Bernie. He said, I'm going to raise taxes on rich people so bad their ears are going to bleed. He said, my rich friends hate me already. He said, I'm going to get killed by this thing. I'm going to raise taxes so high on rich people. That got him a lot of votes. He said, I'm going to give everybody in America health care. It's going to be better than Obamacare. It's going to be cheaper than Obamacare. I know how to do it. The Democrats don't know how to do it. That's Bernie. He stole Bernie. He said, I'm going to clean up the corruption in Washington, D.C. I'm going to end the oligarchy. This government is going to start doing what the people want, not what the billionaires want. I mean, this is like, he was lying through his teeth in all cases.
No, he ran as a populist.
Yeah.
He ran as a populist. He ran pro-labor.
Exactly.
He ran anti-war. He definitely ran as a populist,
Yeah,
but he delivered on nothing.
No, he delivered one thing, and ironically, he delivered it
half
on
a wall, a broken wall.
He delivered it on the second day. Well, no, let's be fair. He did deliver one thing. He did axe the TPP. And that you got, and again, that's to me why he got elected, because that's what won him the Rust Belt.
Oh, and that was the other piece of it. And that was Bernie's platform.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
1000%. So the tools are there. The playbook is there. Like you said, the Eugene Debs, Wallace playbook, it's all there. You just got to know how to execute it. And the only president in our history that I think ever really executed it was not FDR. It was Teddy Roosevelt. He, to me, is our best president. And there are many reasons that I would go through that. He's the only person who ever really challenged the oligarchy when the oligarchy had power. FDR was very fortunate that when he took power, the country was in shambles, and we could have went one of two directions. We could have went the way of fascism, which is the way Nazi Germany ended up going, or we could go the way of democratic populism, socialism, if you will, which is what we ended up doing back in the 30s. And then, of course, we saw how it swung in the complete opposite direction in 1980. Now it's time to swing it back. Now's our time. Now's our time to make that change. And the last thing that I want to mention before we depart is the little story that I wanted to share. When I went to college, I've always been interested in politics. I never thought I would make a career out of it, or at least work in it in some capacity. And when I heard about Bernie running for president, I thought, is there finally going to be somebody who's actually going to do it the right way? And when Bernie said he will do it with no corporate special interest money, I said, that's it. This is the one. I never thought I would be interested. I voted for Obama, but I knew right away, especially with Geithner and Diamond, that, just like anybody else. And Bernie was persona non grata from the very, very beginning. And I ended up calling into your show because Chris Cillizza decided to write a very incendiary article about Bernie by suggesting that Bernie will win and could win Iowa and New Hampshire, and Hillary is still going to crush him after the fact. And I'm just thinking, who writes like this? And eventually I started to learn by having a conversation with you about how this is how it works in DC. Either you're inside or outside. And if you're inside, you don't want anything to do with somebody like Bernie Sanders, because he is dangerous to the life that a lot of these people live. That's why so many people are disinterested with the Washington Post and the New York Times and MSNBC and CNN. And you just crystallized it for me. And I want to thank you for that, because that was really, I started watching you, obviously on The Big Picture. I don't know how you dealt with some of your guests, especially somebody like Horace Cooper. But
are you expecting him to remember your phone call?
No.
Okay.
Not
I'm
necessarily.
just checking.
He might. You never know. But,
I'm sure it was very memorable for him.
Look, we had Alex Lawson. Yeah, we had Alex Lawson on the show. He, talk about somebody who really knows Social Security inside and out. We've had conversations with Ari Riebenhoff. I've learned so much from, what you were putting forward. And
he's a fan. That's what he's saying. He's a fan.
I respect for what he fights for, because it,
So how do we make Jen governor?
I don't know if we want to make Jen governor. I think I think
I'm not running. I won't run for a statewide office.
The only thing that she'll
I don't have it in me to run for a statewide office. I just don't.
But I do think that if Jen is going to run again against Debbie, the only way we can do that is if we absolutely do not have to worry about fundraising. That's a big one. And right now, you can't rush into a decision like this. A lot of people are already thinking about, I'm going to jump in for 22.
We're not deciding yet.
We have a pandemic that is still raging in this state. I don't know about you, but I don't know how you can win a race, a congressional race.
You can't canvass.
If you can't canvass, if you can't knock on doors, if they won't.
There's no events.
Yeah.
To run a grassroots campaign without a ground game is just not something that is very feasible, because what we don't have in money, we make up for in a ground game. But if you can't have events and be able to have things, you've got no ground game. So that's difficult. And
I don't want to get conspiratorial, but I don't put anything past Trump's, little soldier, Ron DeSantis. You can almost make the argument that he is going to delay dealing with this virus until he believes it's safe that he's going to win re-election.
Well, like to subvert the campaigning.
1000%.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it
which is Trump's strategy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, would you agree? I would not put anything past DeSantis.
No.
Because he's just got that in him to just, you know, whatever it's going to take for him to get his second term, he's going to do that. And that's, you know, dealing with this virus in such a putrid way to the point where Biden is now talking about a federal travel ban on the state of Florida. Oh my God. As if our state didn't have enough to deal with.
We are Florida
for a reason.
It's power, not policy, apparently, with DeSantis.
You know what? Well, look, he's mini Trump. He was essentially put there by Trump. And yeah, I mean, and so it is what it is. And honestly, I'd love to see Anna Eskamani get that. And it would be very pleasing to me. I'm skeptical, but yeah, I'm going to stay within my little micro habitat, my little district. It's big enough and it can be commuted, you know, it's easy. I
will say this, Debbie still runs the show. She had a heavy hand. She's very close with Bloomberg and had a lot to do with the current person who is in charge of the state party. But she is the head of the snake. And if Debbie goes, a lot of things will change in the state of Florida. Yeah. I know some people think that's hyperbolic.
No, here it will be a big difference.
Yeah, I've been in this game down here long enough to know that, yeah, all roads lead to her. And because
she ran the DNC, she knows how to be a party boss.
If you, and that's the other thing, you know, this doesn't get talked about enough. She was the head of the DNC for 6 years as an elected representative. You're really not supposed to be. That's why you had Tom Perez. We can talk all we want about how bad they are.
We're not going
But
there.
Tom Perez, Jamie Harrison, these are not elected officials. The fact that she was an elected official who had every intention of becoming Secretary of State in the Clinton administration and would have done anything to make sure that no one got in her way. And they didn't see Bernie coming at all. They really didn't. And when he won the Michigan primary, it was almost like they didn't have any choice. They were basically like, all right, look, we just, if this has to be out in the open,
they didn't even
so
care.
Be it.
Just kneecap
At that point, it's like, okay, we got to do what we got to do.
Take him out.
Because we got plans, baby. But
remember.
Eventually things, you know, eventually the tide turns. And before you go, I must give Tom my impression because
here it goes. All right, do you need your thing? All right, this is part of the shtick. It usually doesn't happen till the end of the show, but
okay.
All right.
Tom, I just want to thank you for all that you've done over the years. I am very grateful for you always having me on your show. It's always a pleasure, and I certainly want you to continue doing what you're doing. I know that I am not exactly popular in DC, but as the head of the Senate Budget Committee, we are going to get some good things done for the American people. Now, if we could just get them their damn stimulus checks. Jen?
We're working on it, Bernie.
I'm working as hard as I can.
We're working on it.
But we're doing the best.
Brilliant. I've never seen such a good Bernie.
Good, right? The mask isn't good, but the voice is good. Like the mask is not ideal.
He's got the voice. Yeah. That's just incredible. And the accent.
And the gestures, too. He's good.
If you haven't heard the hidden history of the American oligarchy, you're going to have to read Thom Hartmann's book. I really recommend it. It's very good. You can get it on. I don't recommend Amazon, but unfortunately, that's where it's sold. So you're going to have to do what you have to do. It's a great book.
They're unionizing.
They're unionizing. That's right. I support the unionization of Bessemer, Alabama, Amazon warehouse workers. And if they unionize, we are going to change how labor is done in the United States. And don't forget, when Reagan was elected president, I was elected mayor of Burlington. Isn't that amazing?
It's a very interesting coincidence.
That's a great story.
That's a great story. All right. All right.
So that's me, and that's for you, because I normally do it at the end of the show. But
you'll bring it back. He'll put it back on. He's got others. He's got others. We're happy at Bernie.
What a talent.
Well, we certainly hope that if you guys haven't read the book yet, highly recommend it. Tom, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Obviously, we hope to see you again. We hope you'll have Jen on at some point.
It's controversial. I get it. It's very sensitive. It's kind of like walking on eggshells, but we don't even know what we're doing yet anyway. But
no, we have to continue to build name recognition regardless. That's the name of the game.
I'm all about educating people and we're about transforming politics into service. That's what we're trying to do. That's the whole point. And sort of putting out there this paradigm of what campaigns should be. Whether or not you win, if you have a campaign of service and education, you're pushing the needle. you're making a difference. It's all part of the progress, whether you win or not. And that's what we're about.
That's essential to get that. And so many people don't get it. It's essential. You're absolutely
That's what we're doing.
Like you say, democracy begins with you. Get out and get active.
Tag, you're it.
And that's what we're going to do.
Tag, you're it.
And that's what we're going to do.
Thank you so much, Thom. I appreciate it so much.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
See you soon. What a great guy.
That was fun.
Yes.
That was good.
And really smooth. Like there was nothing that I would say where, there was no dead air. And we're generally really good at that. We don't have to worry about that with our conversations, but that was an hour.
That's because you and I are both people that don't shut up.
Well, Thom is a talker too.
Okay, so there's why you didn't have any dead air.
No, and that's true. And he's just one of those guys. He's very much like Chomsky from the standpoint of you can learn something new every time. He's an encyclopedia of knowledge about all things politics. But he believes in the saving of the Democratic Party. And look, I can appreciate that. I think he just in his heart believes that there's still the party of FDR and JFK that's out there that can be salvaged. All right. You know what? I think where we are, it's what we have to do. But I do think in other parts of the country, you have to consider other options.
I say, as per always, we need to be doing both. But yeah, and I got a lot of that. I told you when I read this book, there's definitely a lot more of an apologetic tone or not apologetic. It's not as focused on the damage that was done during the Clinton years and the Obama years as it was.
Which is interesting because he was so ready, willing, and able to talk about it during the live stream.
About the Telecommunications Act.
Yeah.
But that's really the only thing in this book where it was really calling out anybody within those 16 years of presidency.
But he did mention the third way because that's really where it started. Because like I said, if you're looking for that singular moment, just like I think the singular moment in the labor movement right now is if Bessemer, Alabama, the workers at the Amazon warehouse facility are able to unionize. That is going to be where Reagan firing the air traffic controllers, it boomerangs back in the other direction. Because the day Reagan fired the air traffic controllers is the day labor died in the United States and the Democratic Party as we knew it was dead. And it was only a few years later that the third way, the DLC was formed with Frum and Clinton, and the rest is history. They decided that we're not being pro-union anymore.
And they're still in control by having their surrogate Kamala in the White House.
Correct.
So we're still dealing with the remnants of that.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how that ultimately unfolds, because what I think will end up happening, I don't think Kamala is not getting in until the second half of Biden's term, if that's what's going to happen. What I do think will happen is, depending on how badly the Democrats get beaten in the midterms, like if they really get pounded in the midterms, then they're definitely going to get Kamala in. They're not going to take any chances because Kamala has only one shot to become president.
So we're going to have somebody potentially that she's going to be president without getting a single vote.
That's correct. And not
a single primary either.
You really want the first woman, Madam President, to be somebody who never got a vote?
No, we don't. No, we do not want that.
But they're going to justify it as, well, there was no other way. That was the only way.
Well, look, all I can say is that regardless of what happens, there will be a primary in 24.
I believe that there will be as well. But again, we look at how these people get picked. You're talking about right now, Buttigieg has no transportation experience whatsoever. Nothing.
Okay. Does Neera Tanden belong managing OMB?
And that is exactly where we will head right now.
Wait. Okay, so that's going to be the transition. That's your
decided,
segue. I forgot that was even the thing.
You decided.
All right. Well, do you know how to do it?
I do now.
Okay. So speaking of Neera Tanden, our friend Neera.
Wouldn't call her a friend at all.
That was very sarcastic.
But Neera is our bootlicker of the week.
Neera could be the bootlicker of life.
Maybe so. But who else could we have possibly picked in this situation because of what we have seen over the past few days? But nobody crystallized it better than Bernie. Bernie very simply said, you work or ran an organization, the Center for American Progress, that has taken millions upon millions of dollars from the oligarchic corporations of America. whether it is Bloomberg, whether it is Walmart, whether it is Bank of America, and I could go on and on. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. Facebook. And what do you think they're doing giving her that money? An organization like Center for American Progress, a think tank in DC, like any other think tank, it could be the Cato Institute, whatever, it doesn't matter. These organizations are given money to basically be front groups for the oligarchy. That's what they're there to do. They're there to make them look good. That's why with the millions of dollars that Cap was able to get, you're able to basically lick the boots of the oligarchy by building troll farms and saying that Bernie's a misogynist and a sexist and a racist and everything in between, and all for money and power. That's all.
She's a vile person.
But she is a vile person.
She's a vile human being.
She outed a sexual abuse victim. She physically assaulted one of her staffers, Faisha Carr.
Just,
I mean, we had David Sirota on the show. If you haven't seen that podcast, highly recommend you go and check it out because he talks about it. He worked with her. And she's as bad as it gets. And, you know, you could, and as we've said, the system that rewards behaviors like that of Neera Tanden is the problem, not Neera. But Neera is more than willing to play the part to get what she wants. And right now, she is trying to take the part and play the part of the person who will stand in Bernie's way of enacting a progressive agenda, because that is what her role will be if she is put in this position. And at the end of the day, I think she's going to get it. Because that's how corrupt DC politics is.
I think everybody is getting everything in this particular cabinet. In this particular, they're rubber stamping everybody. That's just what they do because they're Mick resistance. And Bernie, even if he wanted to, I don't know, on his own would be sufficient anyway to keep it from happening. So he could speak up. I would love to see him really tell her what he really thinks about her.
Well, he did. But he's trying to be as diplomatic about it as possible.
Right. And in my sort of mind, he's not.
And listen, I don't want to put anybody down, because there's something to be said for how well you can enunciate.
Yes, John, she assaulted him.
If you've never heard Neera Tanden speak, she's basically a Valley girl.
This doesn't matter. What does that have to do with anything?
You're putting her in charge of a position not only that is of immense importance, but she doesn't have any experience in whatsoever.
What does that have to do with her coming from the San Fernando Valley?
She doesn't come from the San Fernando Valley. I'm saying that she's basically like she's a bubblehead. Like she doesn't actually.
So don't categorize people Valley girls like that. And
you're not even from California. What do you care?
Doesn't matter. She's just a vile person because she's a vile person.
Yeah,
doesn't matter. She's from the Valley.
What I'm saying is
Jason's
that when
from the Valley.
What I'm saying is that when you listen to her speak, you would think that she's like the biggest ditz alive. I mean, it's just really, well, it's this, it's that. Well, I was not. And again, what I found so interesting about Neera is that when she was presented with all this information about the things that she said, the things that she did, she never apologized.
No, she's not sorry.
She doesn't say, I'm sorry. But you know what? Credit to her for not apologizing, because if she did, she would be full of it. That's the truth. She doesn't actually mean it. This
appointment is basically Biden's homage to the Clintons.
You did your job, Neera. You kneecapped Bernie twice. We got to reward you, baby. That's how things work in DC. You got to get rewarded.
I could vomit.
But to think, when you think about how many people are hurt, when you think about how many people are so desperate for survival and to have representation that is actually in their favor, and they've never had it. And then you get somebody like Neera Tanden who's like, we'll screw him over.
Fortunately for me, I'm a pretty firm believer in karma. So I do believe what goes around comes around. One way or another, people get what's coming to them.
Is she going to get her comeuppance?
Oh, eventually. Of course. Of course. But what does that look like? It could be a myriad of things. What her comeuppance is not necessarily what someone else's is. It's whatever makes her life suck ass.
I do think, that's true, John. The one thing that Tom brought up.
That bothered me, and I didn't say anything.
When he brought up Elizabeth Warren, it's like, listen.
As if somehow she was a progressive.
I understand that Warren is wonky, and she's got some very good points when it comes to the banking industry. But at the end of the day, she ran for president, and she had no chance at even competing with Bernie. And not only did she not exit stage left gracefully after the New Hampshire primary, which she should have, which would have saved her reputation, she had a super PAC that had over $10 million in it. That's not good.
She's not a progressive. She's never been a progressive. She's not a progressive. She has a couple of good policies regarding the banking industry.
I think Andrew Yang is more of a progressive than Elizabeth Warren is.
I just think Elizabeth Warren just goes where the wind blows with everything else.
I think that's true.
I also don't trust her. And I think once she came out at Bernie about the sexist thing, that was it. For me, that was when she crossed over into, okay, now you're just a grifter.
Like, what are you
go away?
But you see, and Warren deserves the most scorn, because you have to ask yourself, what are you doing this for? Like, what are you trying to get out of this? Do you really think that a President Sanders and a President Biden are comparable? They're not. There's no comparability there. You have one person who's literally bought by the system, and you have one that is completely unbought and unbossed. There is no middle ground. This is very distinct. And she knew exactly what she was doing. And I don't care what the hell she was promised. This is something that has to be addressed.
And this is why I think she's a snake. This is why I think the snake emoji is fitting. When she went after Bernie and accused him of that nonsense, yes, of all the people in the world that I would ever believe is sexist, it's Bernie Sanders. That's the most ridiculous thing.
And what I will say, and I'll say this, and this is important. Even if Warren never endorsed Bernie, and she was under no obligation to do it, no one owes you anything. Bernie made his own mistakes by not getting Yang's endorsement, getting Tulsi's endorsement, getting Marianne Williamson's endorsement, and yes, asking Elizabeth Warren to be his VP. He didn't do those things. He should have done them after New Hampshire, and he especially should have done them after Nevada, but he didn't do it. And he had plenty of time, but he didn't do it. So that's his fault. But there was no excuse for Elizabeth Warren to stay in the race after Nevada, and especially after South Carolina. And the fact that she chose to stay in on Super Tuesday, even if she did not endorse Bernie, who knows what might have happened? It certainly would have been a much different race. Bernie almost certainly would have won Massachusetts, would have won Vermont by a bigger margin, obviously would have won Maine, probably would have won Minnesota, and he probably would have won Texas. And that probably would have very well been the race.
She was part of the whole thing, okay? As was Obama, as was Buttigieg and Klobuchar and all those other fools.
And it hurts. It does, because right now we're stuck in a situation where we don't have any survival checks coming. They're going to delay this thing as long as they can. And we don't have universal health care. Now, that's not to suggest that if Bernie was president, that all of this would magically happen. But you better believe he would be fighting for it tooth and nail and going on TV and doing whatever was necessary to talk about it every single day, to the point in which people would say, get us our damn check. Because the real uprising in this country is going to come from the working class when they figure out that it's all sides in the oligarchy that are not giving them what they need in order to survive. You can't ask somebody to have decorum if they don't have a pot to piss in. What are you expecting them to do? Just wait around and hope that something will happen? No, they're going to take action. And it's not going to be pretty. And you could try to turn this country into a police state, but I got to tell you, a lot of the police, I guarantee you, they sympathize with the working people. They do. Because most cops are working class. They are. You may not like them. And there's a lot of problems with police in this country, and it all starts with the fraternal order of police. But at some point, you're going to have to ask yourself, how much more kneecapping is the establishment going to be able to get away with from grassroots representation before ultimately something comes about? I don't know. But I do sympathize wholeheartedly with a lot of people that are out there right now. You know, I lived in abject poverty for a couple of years. I've had my business completely decimated by this virus. I cannot get unemployment benefits from the state, no matter how hard I try, no matter how many different ways I try to navigate the system. I'm very fortunate where I have always been smart with my money, and I have reserves, and I can survive.
By any means, if you all feel for poor Peter here and would like to help us, by all means, feel free to subscribe. Feel free to be a Patreon member.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Help poor Peter.
But that's not going to go to me. That's going to go to our causes.
It's
going to go to.
I was just listening to your sort of story, and I'm like, oh, it's almost like a Save the Child ad. So I was kind of thinking, like, maybe put that in there.
Well, this is not an ad by Sally Struthers, but nevertheless,
save the starving people.
We're in bad shape. We are. I lost my home. So
will you stop saying that, please?
I would never have had to sell it.
I don't care. That's not the same thing. And that's insulting to people.
Okay, fair enough. I had to sell my house because I couldn't afford to keep it anymore.
Okay. That I accept that, but stop saying you lost your house.
Fair enough. That did. That's true. And again, your life gets completely uprooted, and the stories are much, much worse than mine. Much worse. I just don't know how much more people are going to be willing to put up with this.
Well, we're not. I mean, we're not. I think that it's happening. It's happening slowly but surely.
It's
happening.
And again, Thom was very agreeable to most, if not all, of what we were saying. There's not this, divisiveness that's going on. And we don't need to be divisive. There's no reason. We're all in agreement on almost everything. There's always going to be points of contention.
I'm not even going to agree about divisive versus divisive.
Okay.
I'm just saying, I think we have to agree to disagree about that.
All right, that's fair. Can't agree on everything.
Say divisive.
Yeah, but we're not divisive. We are trying to build the working class coalition, the labor coalition. That's what we need to do. And right now, I think, as we talked about before, the importance of the Bessemer, Alabama, Amazon workers trying to form a labor union. To me, if they're able to do that, that is a massive, massive game changer. And I really do believe if they're able to pull that off.
I don't want to get too excited.
No, but a lot of people are coming out in their favor. But look, Bernie came out for them.
I would hope so.
And will Joe Biden come out for them? I doubt it.
Okay, can we talk about Joe for a second? Because this reminds me that I just saw today that they are going to continue their prosecution against Julian Assange.
Oh, that's not good.
No. So Joe came out today, or whoever Joe's people came out today, and said that they are going to. Oh, you're being unserious, and I'm being very serious because this is a Julian Assange problem. All right, I'm done because now you're sitting there with your Bernie mask
you could
on.
Be serious. I support Julian Assange.
No, I don't see you standing up for Julian Assange right now.
Well, my good friend Joe doesn't want me to do that.
Exactly. Your friend Joe is not standing up for Julian Assange. So I'm just saying, I just saw something today that they were continuing to appeal and seek extradition. I find it infuriating.
Well, I definitely think that Julian Assange should be left alone. And I heard that there are a lot of people like Daniel Ellsberg coming out saying that he should be left alone. And I certainly hope that that is the case.
I think that all of our representatives and our senators need to be standing up for our First Amendment rights. That's what I think. And I think that extraditing Julian Assange is a flagrant violation of the First Amendment. So that's my opinion on that. And you could be saying that. And instead we're impeaching Trump again, even though that you can't possibly get the votes. So I think that there's other more important things to be doing right now, especially getting people their checks.
I think I speak on behalf of the senator. And when I say that I support Julian Assange, I mean what I say.
Okay.
He should be free. And that's that.
Well, I'm just saying your friend Joe does not see it that way. And your friend Joe is going to continue to seeking extradition of Julian Assange.
Well, unfortunately, Joe is the president and I'm not.
Yeah.
And there's only so much that I can do. But there are a lot of people speaking up in support of Mr. Assange, and they believe that he should be free. So let's hope that's what's going to happen.
All right. Why are you burning again?
I just wanted to thank everybody for coming on the show tonight because Thom Hartmann is a friend and I go on his show at least once a month. Got a lot of great conversation. We have to continue the conversation. And as the chair of the Senate Budget Committee, we have to make sure that our people get the necessary help. We're going to get them the survival checks sometime this year. Lord knows when that might be. We got to get them universal health care. Got to keep working for that. We got to keep working and building that coalition. That's what your job is.
That's what my job is?
Yes. You have to build your coalition here in South Florida.
Yeah, it would be nice if we had sitting congressmen and representatives that would endorse us and come down here and help us build a progressive coalition so that we're not starting from the bottom.
I can assure you, we are paying attention.
Yeah.
My wife, Jane, is following you now. So,
well, maybe she'll endorse me.
Well, listen, if Jane tells me to endorse you, then I don't really have a choice now, do I?
Oh, no. Bernie's eyes are terrifying. They're ridiculous. He looks like he's got some sort of like cross-eye thing, and the glasses are wrong. And stop it.
I can't see very well, but that's my cataracts. I mean, I'm almost 80 years old. What do you expect? But I am still fighting for the people, and I'm going to continue to fight for the people. And maybe I'll fight for you. You never know. Maybe
you will. Maybe you'll come out and maybe endorse if we decide to do this again, because the truth is we can't do this without that. Like not your personal endorsement, but in general.
Thank you. Don't put too much pressure on me.
No, I don't feel like that. I feel like in general, people that challenge incumbents do not get enough support from sitting representatives, from labor unions, from all sorts of places that even when they know that person would better serve their interests. And so that takes courage that a lot of people don't have. And it's unfortunate when I see that from our sitting senators and representatives.
I can't disagree.
All right. So that's that.
We will see.
And I would say that really to Bernie, by the way. I would, because it's very disappointing. People that fight for Medicare for all should also be fighting for the candidates that support Medicare for all against incumbents that specifically don't.
Well, I am no fan of Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Sure,
I can assure you of that. And I know she does not fight for Medicare for all. In fact, she has voted against every piece of legislation I have ever put forward. Can you imagine that? Every single piece of legislation, she votes against it.
I'm sure she does. Did you know that she's an alumni of ALEC?
Yes, I did know that. And I understand that she does not care very much for labor. She voted to fast track the TPP.
Yeah.
She's not a very good representative of the people, is she?
No, she's not.
Well, at some point, she's not going to be representing the 23rd Congressional District anymore, whether by election or redistricting, whatever it's going to be. But the Wasserman Schultz, she thinks she's going to sit there for another 30 years.
Maybe somebody throws a bucket of water on her and she melts.
I don't know if that's true or not. I've only heard it as a rumor. It may be true. It may not be true. But she certainly has. She has very scary eyes, from what I remember.
This is not something you should be saying with that mask on your face. Scary eyes.
I didn't really like being around her. I found her presence to be very disturbing, and I definitely was not a fan.
Yeah.
But Thom was a big fan of me tonight. Can you believe it? I mean,
Tom's always been a big fan of yours.
Well, I go on his show. Who else goes on his show that works in Congress? Not that many people, but I went on his show because he's a good man and he's fighting for the causes. And I certainly appreciate everybody coming on the show tonight, watching, supporting generational change. We certainly need generational change in this country. We appreciate all of you. Remember, become a Patreon.
Yes.
You can contribute in the super chat and every other wonderful thing. Oh, and very important. Apparently, you cannot sell merch on your show before you get to 10,000 subscribers.
Yeah. So people subscribe if you're not. Although everybody who's here now is probably a subscriber. So
that's great. But you have to share the video, and you definitely have to get the word out.
Yeah.
Because you have to subscribe to Generational Change. We're almost at 6,000 subscribers. That's a really great number.
Yeah, I know it is.
But it's a far cry away from 10,000.
He is crazy, bro.
Got to get you there. Got to cross. Got to do some more shows with other people. We'll get the audiences bigger and bigger and bigger. Huge. It's gonna be huge. I'm gonna make it happen. I'll catch you later, Jim.
All right.
It's been an interesting night. But it's been fun. It's been a fun show. We have an excellent show today, right, Jen?
Oh, yes, it was fabulous show. We have such a good show for you today.
Yes. Well, every show is great, but we certainly are thrilled with where the show is going right now. We are growing every time we go online. The amount of people watching increases every time, which is great. You have to continue to subscribe, share, like, comment, all of it. That's going to allow us to really grow, and it's working. That's so also on a local level, Gen Core stuff. So yes. Tomorrow, Friday, is I'll be at the Garden in the morning. We'll be at a mobile school pantry distribution in the afternoon. I think
It's at West Hollywood. I'm like 90% sure. But more importantly than what's going on tomorrow is that our new volunteer app, do we call it an app? Is it a program? I never know.
Melissa, what do we call it?
What do we call it, Melissa? So we have a volunteer coordinator who is on, or she was on. I don't know if she's still, certainly do not require her to sit there and watch this. But thank you, Mark. That she is going to, we are now ready to go live with our program. So now when people go and sign up on our website, which is generationalchange.com, you can sign up to be a Gen Corps volunteer on there. And now that information is going into our new software situation so that people will be able to check the calendar, see what's going on, and sign up to do events all on this app. There's an app. I can't begin to tell you how that works. However, today, Melissa had said that she was going to, I asked her if she would do this, and she was very happy to say yes, that we are going to be able to do a demonstration video to show people how to do this new app and sign up and be a part of this locally. And also, I would like to encourage people, even if you're not local, to sign up, because even though you can't do local stuff, there's going to be a few things that we're going to be promoting, several candidates that we're wanting people to volunteer with. We've got Nina Turner, obviously. We have Lee Carter in Virginia. And so we're working on, getting that linked up as well. So that's what's going on with Gen Corps.
Yep. We're also looking to have Andrew Yang and Diana Morales, who are both running for mayor of New York City, to come on the show in the near future as well. We have a lot of guests lined up. Next week, Thursday's show, we're going to figure out how we're going to do it, whether we're just going to do an afternoon spot and then the regular evening spot.
I'm not sure. We have a timing situation on Thursday. Who is coming on Thursday?
Michael E. Mann, who wrote The Climate War, a very highly respected book about essentially about the ravages of climate change and how this is going to become an economic war, survival war, whatever you want to call it. But getting a lot of praise with that book that he's written. And listen, knowledge is power. The more we know, the better we are.
And when is that? Do we have a time yet?
Yes, I believe it's 2:00 p.m.
Okay,
John,
so we're going to be,
I believe it's 2
so
p.m.
we'll have
Thursday.
an earlier live on Thursday than we normally do.
Now we'll determine if we're going to go, live again, normally at 8 p.m. Because we do have a couple of potential guests in flux for next week.
Yeah, we have a few different options.
Donna and yes, we would obviously.
I'll have Donna. I mean, that's.
Donna's good people.
Has she announced? Is she running?
I don't know. I would imagine she probably would, but we'll see. I mean, like I said, right now, this is just a really weird time. I mean, I don't know what it's like in other parts of the country, but I could tell you.
Okay, yeah. So here, this is.
Yep.
That is 2 p.m. on Thursday. We'll be speaking with Michael Mann, apparently about climate crisis.
Yes.
Such a great topic.
It is. It's a great topic. And especially for, the people down here, let's not forget that, we are ground zero for sea level rise. And I mean,
so I just want to point out that
migration is going to be insane.
Nina had said something about our garden and about how to do that.
Yes.
I highly recommend everybody, if you haven't, watching the Netflix movie Kiss the Ground. It's just a really good sort of overall intro into the kind of garden and what we're working on here, which is a very permaculture, sustainable, natural garden, as opposed to just planting everything you want.
What was her name again? What was the lady's name that did the
Kristen Olson? Well, that's the book.
Kristen Olson podcast.
Yeah, and I interviewed a woman named Kristen Olson. She has a book called "The Soil Will Save Us," and if you would check out that,
Nina, check that out, everybody. If you haven't checked out, and we're going to continue to post some of our older podcasts.
Yeah, and the other thing I would recommend, Nina, is there is an organization in Orlando called Fleet Farming, and check that out. I spoke with Lee Perry, but that was before we were officially doing this podcast. That was when we were still in a campaign, I believe, right? Was I still campaigning? It's all a blur. But anyway, we had her on, and Fleet Farming is this amazing concept, which is what ultimately we would like to have spawn out of the garden here. So fleet farming is when somebody who is a homeowner wants to have a garden, a vegetable garden, an edible garden on their front lawn, on I guess anywhere on their property, really. But they don't necessarily want to take care of that garden. When you have something like fleet farming, you have a group of volunteers that will go around, like let's say they were volunteers from our community garden. They would go around, they would take care of everybody's gardens. The people that own the space would get a portion of the produce that's grown on their land. And then the rest of the produce goes into the community garden and gets part of like this exchange program, because not everywhere is growing everything. So you end up not just having your community garden, but you end up having a whole garden of community, like a whole bunch of community gardens or a garden community.
Yeah,
really,
the goal is to
you end up having a garden community where everybody contributes to that.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing.
And it can be easily duplicated. You just need the land. As a matter of fact, I mentioned that to Jackie. We, obviously we have, we've developed some pretty solid relationships with, some of our local elected officials. And one of the city commissioners in Sunrise is definitely a fan of the idea of, doing a community garden somewhere in their community.
That'd be great.
That, again, it can, we have the team that can show you how to do this. You just have to have the land. Once you have the land,
and that you make it sound like that's so easy, and it's
not. Not in Broward County.
No,
isn't.
It's not. And unfortunately, municipalities make it very, very difficult to use their even land that they own that's just sitting there doing nothing.
And let's take it a step further. Let's not forget that a lot of our local officials also take money from big agriculture, and that's a big part of the problem. And they do not want any part of sustainable agri-farming to go on. They don't, because the second people really start learning how to do this on their own, they're not going to be, giving into the, to the big agriculture system that doesn't necessarily want people to learn how to do things on their own. Because when they do that, the bottom line goes down.
And I actually think a lot of it also has to do with they don't want to add value to a lot of these neighborhoods by doing gardens. They'd rather see them fall further and further into despair so that they can buy up the lots and gerrymander them. War is a racket.
Big time.
So I think that too. And when you have developers that are buying lots in our disenfranchised neighborhood, hoping to basically build it up to be some gerrymandered, whole new experience for people, they don't want a community garden there, because that makes it more of a stronger community that they have to then, it doesn't work that way. They don't want that there. They don't want
think about it. Think about how much money you spend on produce. And if you're able to sustainably grow your own fruits and vegetables, at the community garden we have in Hollywood, we've got it all.
We've got it all. Well, but here's the thing that's very important is that this is being done by master gardeners that not only understand this concept of sustainable agriculture, but it also has to do with working with your native species and things that thrive in your climate. And that is the entire premise of our garden. It's going to be educational. We're going to have different irrigation systems that we can show people. And what we're going to also be very clear about is that this is for people to do at home as well.
Correct.
So one of the things, and we've even already started doing this at the garden, even though we're not completely up and running, is that if somebody comes by, then, and if there's one of our master gardeners there, they'll give them a clipping of something to take home and grow themselves. That's what we want to do. We've got mulch, we've got clippings. We want,
Bo, I would definitely say that the focus obviously is YouTube, but
for right now anyway,
we also have a large audience that follows Jen on Twitter and Facebook. So we want to try to get everybody that we can over to YouTube when they can. And so that's why at the beginning, I don't think we have it up now, but again, we've had a lot of comments tonight. But usually what we'll do is just say, watch on YouTube, because that's where it is the most value to what we're doing. And right now we're growing steadily, but we're growing effectively. And so it's these types of things, the knowledge of what it takes to really build a movement, it can't just be built on the idea of politics. It's got to be built outside of that. And that's where things like sustainable farming, food distribution.
It's important. It's really important. We have to basically help ourselves.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate, but that's the position. And when I say help ourselves, I mean collectively, but that's the position that we're in right now.
Yeah. And people, want to have that sense of community, but it's so easy to get divided these days.
Yeah.
So we're trying to avoid that.
The garden is lovely. It's a great thing. I encourage people to come out if you can. I mean, yeah, I know it's not great that right now it's Fridays. I know people work. It's not the best day for everybody. Once this is like up and functioning, it will be a daily thing because it's going to daily need it to be. I mean, so there will be volunteer slots for people that want to help out. And you know, we're just keep getting it going right now. Actually, tomorrow we're putting up our temporary fence.
That should be important.
Yeah. Which sounds like kind of more my thing than planting. I always worry that I'm going to kill things when I plant them.
And believe me, where we're building this garden, there's a lot of things you got to worry about, like broken glass.
There's a lot of broken glass.
So,
and that, well, once we have a permanent fence, then all of that stuff won't be a problem. It's where the corner is there's this corner store, and a lot of the people that hang out outside the corner store, there's broken bottles. There's, you know, this.
But again, we're trying to change the culture of the way things are done in this country. It just takes a spark. It starts somewhere, and you never know where it's going to be. Like I said, the moment that Reaganism took hold in the United States was when he fired the air traffic controllers, and we have been running down that road ever since. I do believe that if they are able to unionize at the Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, that will be the boomerang effect in the other direction towards labor. And that's what we need. But we need to continue to fight as best we can.
We need a labor party.
We do. So we're working on it. Whether that's in the Democratic Party or not, we'll find out.
Notice how I don't mind being around because I ate today. So like I'm not even hungry.
Okay. Well,
normally by now I'd be like clawing at you to go make me something to eat.
Okay. Well, I think we've run our course. So we're over 2 hours now, and I think everybody's had enough for today. I know some people go even longer than this.
I know. Well, you know, it's just.
Yeah.
I don't feel like that's kind of like you're just overkill.
Yeah. Well, we're not overkilling, but we appreciate you, everybody, coming out. So
we'll be back on Monday. We're not sure yet.
8 o'clock, but it'll be a surprise guest.
You'll
enjoy whoever it is. And we're hopefully going to get Jen on some additional shows, possibly this weekend. So,
we are?
Yeah, possibly.
What am I getting on?
Don't know yet, but we'll see. And there are conversations being had right now.
There's conversations?
John knows.
Uh-oh, conversations being had.
We'll see. All right, guys.
Bye, all. Peace out. You know you copy me now when you do that.
I don't say it. I just put up the deuce.
I know.